He had loved her since the altar, not since before. He was precise about this in the specific accounting he conducted in the small hours when sleep did not come, which was most small hours. He had not loved her before the altar. He had known Christopher was marrying someone and had stood beside Christopher at the altar with the uncomplicated pride of a man performing the specific duty of friendship at its highest occasion. He had been happy for Christopher, which was the honest truth of the moment before. Then Tiffany had walked through the doors. He had not fallen in love watching her walk toward them, which would have been the more forgivable narrative, the one he sometimes attempted to construct in the small hours, to make what had happened more comprehensible. He had not fallen in love during the ceremony, watching her face, which would have been the more romantic version. He had fallen in love when she took his hand. The specific moment, the ceremony complete, Christopher kissing his bride, the particular reorganization of everyone's position in the room. He had extended his hand to her in the formal gesture of welcome, which was what the best man did, which was the ordinary choreography of weddings and which he had performed without expectation. She had taken it. She had looked at him with the specific quality of warmth that was simply her quality. He would understand this later. Would understand that she looked at everyone with this quality, that it was the expression of who she was, rather than any particular regard for him. He had not understood this in the moment. In the moment he had received the warmth as a message, and the message had gone somewhere it was not supposed to go. He had understood, in the same instant, what had happened. He had also understood in the same instant that what had happened was a catastrophe. He had smiled. He had said the appropriate words. He had performed the remainder of the wedding celebration with the composure of a man who had been trained by 2 years of northern campaign to perform competence under conditions that would have destroyed most people. He had gone home. He had sat in his study. He had understood, methodically and completely, what the next years of his life were going to require of him. He had resolved to require it. But before we go to the terrace, before we stand in the midsummer rain and watch a man drape a cloak over a woman's shoulders and feel her shiver, and understand that he cannot say the thing, I need to ask you something. If you loved someone you were not allowed to love, not forbidden by cruelty or by the arbitrary rules of a social world, but by the specific honest bond of loyalty to a man who trusted you with everything including his wife, what would you do with the love? Drop your answer in the comments, because Julian had a specific answer. He burned it. Every night, he wrote it down in the pages of a diary, and then he put the pages in the fire and watched them go. He had been burning it for 2 years. The fire had not been enough. Subscribe and hit the bell. And tell me where you are watching from tonight. Your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room. Now, let's begin. Christopher had been his brother in the specific sense that soldiers use the word, the sense that meant something forged rather than inherited, the bond of men who had been in the same circumstances and who had survived those circumstances together, and who had therefore established a relationship that the ordinary language of friendship was insufficient to describe. They had met in the Northern Campaign, in the 2nd year of Julian's service and the 3rd year of Christopher's, and they had been thrown together by the specific logistics of 2 officers sharing a command responsibility that neither of them had been expecting to share. The sharing had been difficult at first. They were both men of strong opinion and specific methods, and the methods had not aligned in the first months. They had aligned eventually in the specific way of things that needed time and pressure to find their proper position. They had been at war for another 1.5 years after that, and the 1.5 years had the quality of all wars, which was the quality of men existing in conditions that were incompatible with civilization and who were required to maintain themselves as civilized men within those conditions. He had watched Christopher do this with the specific quality of a man who had a code and maintained it, which was the quality Julian recognized in himself and which he had found, across the 1.5 years, the most important thing about a person. The code was the thing. Christopher kept the code. Julian kept the code. This was the bond. When Christopher had come to him 2 years after the campaign, glowing with the specific quality of a man who had found something he had not expected to find, and had said, I am going to marry someone. I need you to meet her. Julian had understood that the meeting mattered, that Christopher was not simply introducing a wife, but was presenting to Julian the most important person in his new life, and was asking, with the specific asking of two men who had a bond, for Julian's presence at the altar. Julian had been there. The altar had done what altars sometimes did to men who were not prepared. The 2 years had been a specific kind of education. He had learned, across the dinners and the gala evenings and the afternoons when Christopher was occupied and Tiffany was in the garden and Julian was nominally managing the estate's security concerns, the exact dimensions of what he was managing. He had learned that she read widely and remembered everything she read and had opinions about what she read, that she expressed with the specific directness of a woman who had not been taught to manage her opinions down. He had learned that she laughed with her whole face and that the laugh was real. He could see this clearly, had become expert at it in a way he would have been ashamed to admit, which was that he could tell the social laugh from the genuine laugh, and the genuine laugh was the one that happened when she was genuinely surprised by something funny, and that he organized small sentences and observations in the hope of producing it. He had learned that she was lonely. This was the knowledge he found most difficult, more difficult than the love itself, because the love was his problem, and he had organized it accordingly, but the loneliness was her problem, and he could not address it without addressing everything else, and addressing everything else was not available to him. Christopher was frequently absent, not cruelly. He was not a cruel man, Christopher. He was a man of considerable political ambition, and that ambition required presence in rooms that were not his own estate, and he managed the balance between the estate and those rooms in the way of a man who had not fully understood that the balance required more active management than he was giving it. He left Tiffany alone. He trusted Julian to ensure she was not without protection. Julian ensured she was not without protection. He sat across from her at dinners when Christopher was in Parliament. He walked the garden boundary when she was in the garden. He attended the events she attended without Christopher and stood at the appropriate distance and watched, with the composed attention of a sentry, everything that was not available to him. He burned the diary pages every night. He wrote and he burned, and he woke the next morning with the composure reinstalled and went back to the dinner table and the garden boundary and the appropriate distance. The burning was not enough to extinguish anything. It only confirmed what was there. The Midsummer Gala was at Christopher's palace, which was the specific kind of occasion that required everyone to be present and that organized the social world around itself for a week. He had been watching Christopher vanish into the private rooms with the ministers for 2 hours. He had been watching Tiffany manage this vanishing with the specific composed grace of a woman who had become practiced at managing it, which was not the same as being unbothered by it, and he could see the difference. She had slipped out to the terrace at 9. He had followed. Not because he had decided to follow, because he was the man whose function in her life was to follow, to ensure she was not without protection, to be the presence that Christopher was not. He had the cloak already, which was the specific preparedness of a man who had been watching the temperature drop and who had noted her leaving without the appropriate covering, and who had taken the cloak from the footman without thinking, because the thinking was not required. He had gone to the terrace. He had found her at the balustrade, looking at the rain-slicked garden with the expression he had learned to recognize, the expression underneath the composed grace, the one she wore when the managing had become too much for the evening, and she had come somewhere private to set it down for a moment. He had approached. He had draped the cloak over her shoulders. His fingers had touched the bare skin of her neck. The shiver had gone through them both. He had felt it in her, and he had felt it in himself, and he had stood behind her for a moment that was longer than the moment should have been, very still, not breathing in any useful way. She had turned. She had looked up at him with her eyes, which had the specific quality that her eyes had in the private moments, the genuine quality, without the social management. "Christopher has forgotten I am even here, Julian," she said. He had looked at her face. He had wanted. He had catalogued the wanting with the brutal honesty he brought to the diary pages and which he would burn later. He had wanted to tell her that he saw her, that he had been seeing her for 2 years, that there was not a moment in any room they shared, that she was not the primary thing he was seeing, that her presence organized the room for him in a way that nothing else did, that the specific quality of watching her be invisible to Christopher was the specific quality of a man watching something extraordinary be treated as ordinary. He had wanted to tell her all of this. He had stepped back. He had stepped back into the shadow of the balcony wall, and he had heard his own voice, which sounded to him like the voice of a man performing something, saying, "Christopher is a busy man, Tiffany. Do not doubt his affection." She had looked at him. He had heard the lie. She had heard, perhaps, something else, the quality underneath the lie, the specific strained quality of a voice that was performing something it was not. He had not stayed to assess what she had heard. He had said good night. He had left. He had gone home. He had written the diary pages and burned them, and sat in the specific hell of a man who has maintained his honor and cannot determine whether the maintaining was noble or simply a more elaborate form of cowardice. The decision to leave had taken 3 days, not to make. The decision had been available. He had known it was there. He had been not making it for 2 years. 3 days to move from the available decision to the made one. The movement had happened when he had sat with the honest accounting and had understood that the situation was not sustainable. Not in the dramatic sense of a man who was about to do something. He was not about to do anything. He was not going to do anything. The honor was real, and the code was real, and Christopher was real. But, in the slow, structural sense of something that was not designed for permanence, giving way under the weight of what was being asked of it. He could not continue to be the specific presence in her life that he was being asked to be. He could not sit across from her at dinners indefinitely. He could not watch Christopher forget she existed indefinitely. He could not burn diary pages indefinitely without understanding that the burning was not a solution but a symptom. He had to go. He had told Christopher in the morning, with the practiced directness of 2 men who spoke to each other, without the social mediation that they both found inefficient. He had offered the colonies, a shipping enterprise, which was real. He had been watching it develop for a year, with the specific attention of a man who was preparing contingencies, as the explanation. Christopher had been genuinely sad. This had been its own specific quality, the sadness of a man who did not know what he was losing, and therefore could not understand the full dimensions of what had just happened. Christopher's sadness was real, and was the sadness of a man who was going to miss his friend, and it was also completely insufficient to the situation, and Julian had received it with the composure he had been maintaining, and had said the appropriate things and had left. The farewell dinner had been the worst evening of the 2 years, which was saying something, because the 2 years had contained considerable material in the category of worst evenings. She had approached him at the end. She had had the pocket watch, small, silver, with the engraving on the back that he had run his thumb over so many times in the following years that the engraving had become smooth. "Why are you running away, Julian?" she said. "London will be so dark without your presence." He had looked at her face. He had done what he did every time he looked at her face, which was the specific, comprehensive memorization of a man who understood that what he was looking at was not going to be available to him much longer. He had memorized the way the dinner candlelight sat on her collarbone, which was the thing he burned diary pages about. He had memorized the specific quality of the concern in her eyes, which was the genuine concern of someone who cared about him in the way she cared about everyone, which was the warm, honest quality that had done what it did to him at the altar. "Some shadows belong in the dark, Tiffany," he had said. "Pray for my journey." He had taken the watch. He had left. The colonies had the quality of a place that was doing something independent of him, and that was large enough to organize a life around, even when the life felt hollow. He had built the shipping enterprise with the specific focused attention of a man who had found a project, and who was applying to the project the capacity he could not apply elsewhere. The enterprise had become considerable within 5 years, not because he was particularly gifted in the commercial sense, though he was competent, but because the application of a man who had nothing else to do with his intelligence and energy was the application of the full resource without reservation. He had nothing else to do with his intelligence and energy. He had rejected every introduction that the colonial social world had produced, which was numerous, because the colonial social world had its own specific machinery for the management of an available Earl, and the machinery had been applied. He had rejected each one with the composed courtesy of a man who was not available, and who was not going to become available. He held the watch. Every evening, It was the specific ritual of a man who understood what he was doing and who had assessed the available alternatives and found the ritual the least harmful of them. He opened the latch, the portrait inside, which he had not known was there until the third day at sea, which had been among the specific moments of his life, and he looked at it, and he thought about the things he did not permit himself to think about during the day, which was the specific hour he had allowed himself. He thought about her. He thought about what was happening in London that he was not seeing. He thought about Christopher continuing to be politically ambitious, and Tiffany continuing to be composed about it. He thought about the dinners from which he was absent, and the garden where he was not walking the boundary, and the terrace where there was no one to bring a cloak. He thought about the shiver. He thought about this with the particular quality of things you were not going to let yourself fully have, but that you were not going to pretend didn't exist. The shiver had been both of them. He had felt her feel what he felt. He did not know what she had understood about what she felt. He did not know if she had understood anything about it. He thought about this. He thought about a great many things. The letter arrived on a Thursday in January, 8 years after the farewell dinner. It was from Christopher. He recognized the hand, which he had not seen on a letter in 3 years. They wrote less than they had, which was the natural consequence of time and distance, but they wrote. The letter had the quality of Christopher's letters, which were direct and specific, and assumed that Julian knew the context because Julian always knew the context. He read it. He read it once. He set it down. He picked it up. He read it again. The letter said several things. It said that Christopher had been ill for some time, the specific illness of a man who had been managing considerable stress and a physical constitution that was not as robust as it appeared, and who had been poorly for the better part of a year. It said that the illness had produced in Christopher the specific recalibration of priorities that illness sometimes produced, the reassessment of what mattered when the alternative to the mattering was made visible. The letter said that Christopher had come to understand some things about his marriage that he wished he had understood sooner. It said this with the specific honest plainness of Christopher writing to Julian, which was the plainness that was available between two men who had the bond they had. It said, "I have not been the husband she deserved. I know this now in the way I should have known it years ago. I am correcting it." It said, "She asked about you last week. She asks sometimes." He set the letter down. He looked at the window. He thought about the code. He thought about the honor. He thought about 2 years and 8 years, and the burning diary pages, and the shiver on the terrace, and the way she had looked at him at the farewell dinner with the question he had not answered. He thought about 8 years of evenings with the pocket watch, and the 1 hour he allowed himself, and the portrait inside the latch. He thought about the things that were available to him. He thought about the things that were not. He wrote back. The response took 3 weeks to arrive. He had written to Christopher. He had written to Christopher with the directness that their bond allowed, which was the directness of saying the actual thing rather than organizing around it. He had said, "I am coming home." He had not said why. Christopher did not ask why. Christopher had written, "Good." He arrived in London on a Tuesday in March, which was the specific cold, clear quality of March in London that he had forgotten, and that arrived as a recognition when the ship reached port. The air was London air, which was different from colonial air in a way he had not been able to describe to anyone there who had not been to London. He went to Christopher's estate that afternoon. He went with the specific quality of a man who has made a decision and who is proceeding with this decision, because the proceeding is what decisions required. Christopher received him in the study. Christopher looked, the letter had told him, but seeing was different. He looked like a man who had been through something and who had been changed by the through. Not diminished, changed. The specific quality of a man who had been forced to reckon with something and who had reckoned with it honestly and had emerged on the other side as a different version of himself. They sat. They talked for an hour with the quality they had always had, the direct, the honest, the specific efficiency of two men who had the bond. Christopher said, "She's in the garden." Julian was quiet. "She's been there most of the afternoon," Christopher said. "She prefers it." Julian looked at his hands. "I know what happened," Christopher said. Julian looked at him. "Not the specific." Christopher stopped. I don't know the specific, but I know you. I've known you for 15 years. And I know that you left England for a shipping enterprise in the colonies. He looked at Julian with the quality. You do not care about shipping. Julian said nothing. I was not the husband she deserved, Christopher said. I was not the friend you deserved. I have spent the past year understanding both of these things. He was quiet. The illness has a quality of clarification that I cannot recommend as a method, but that has been efficient. Julian looked at the window. I am telling you, Christopher said, that I see what I did not see. I am not telling you anything else. What happens next is not mine to direct. Julian looked at him. Go to the garden, Christopher said. She was at the east end, near the roses, which were the early spring roses, and which were doing what they did in March, which was the first cautious reaching of something that would be considerable later. She had her back to him. He stood at the garden entrance. He had the pocket watch in his pocket. He had been carrying it for 8 years. He walked across the garden. She heard him. She turned. She looked at him. He looked at her. She had the quality she had always had, which was the quality that had done what it did at the altar, and that had not diminished in the specific way that things sometimes diminished across years of absence in his imagination. She was exactly herself, which was the specific, terrifying thing about the moment. Julian, she said. Tiffany, he said. They were quiet. She was looking at him with the attending quality he had learned, which was the quality she used when she was looking at something real. You came back, she said. Yes, he said. Why, she said. He had the honest answer. He had been carrying it and burning it, and watching the burning, and finding it intact the next morning. He looked at her. He produced the pocket watch. He held it out. She looked at it. She looked at him. He opened the latch. Her portrait was inside. She looked at the portrait for a long time. She looked at him. You asked me why I was running away, he said, at the farewell dinner. Yes, she said. I was running away, he said, because I could not stay, because staying required me to be something I was not, which was indifferent to you, and I was not capable of being indifferent to you, and I was also not capable of being anything other than indifferent to you in the specific circumstances we were in. She was very still. I have been carrying this, he said. I have been burning the pages and carrying this, and I am done burning the pages. She looked at the portrait. She looked at him. Julian, she said. I am not asking for anything, he said. I want to be honest about that. I am not presenting this as a claim or I am presenting it as the truth, and which you deserve to have, even if the having of it changes nothing. She was quiet. She reached out. She took the watch from his hand. She held it. She turned it over. She ran her thumb across the engraving on the back, which was worn smooth in the specific way of things that had been touched many times, in the dark, by a man who had allowed himself 1 hour in the evenings. She looked up. The terrace, she said. He was quiet. The shiver, she said. He said nothing. I was not sure, she said. I have thought about it years, and I was not certain what I had felt or what it meant, or whether I had understood it correctly. She held the watch. I was not certain of anything except that you left the next morning, and I have spent not asking Christopher why, because asking Christopher why would have required explaining what I was asking about. He looked at her. He is different now, she said. The illness, he is different. I know, Julian said. I love him, she said. I want to be honest about that. I love him and I have loved him, and the love is real, and it has also been, she stopped, finding the accurate word, insufficient, for both of us. The love has been insufficient for the life we have been living. Julian was quiet. He did not know where this was going. He had not known where this was going when he decided to come to the garden. He had known only that the burning was not enough, and that the 1 hour in the evening with the watch was not enough. I am not asking for anything, he said again. I know, she said. She held the watch. What are you asking for? He said. She looked at him. Time, she said. I am asking for time. I have not had the full picture, and I need time with the full picture. He nodded. And honesty, she said. I am asking for honesty. Going forward, not burning pages. He was quiet. I cannot promise, he said carefully, anything beyond what is. I know what is, she said. I am not asking you to promise what is not. I am asking you to stop burning the pages. He looked at her. He looked at the watch in her hand. He had burned years of pages. The watch was still there. Yes, he said. All right. She held the watch. The March garden was doing what March gardens did, which was the cautious beginning of something that would be considerable later. He stood in it. She stood in it. They were in the same garden. This was the beginning, which was not the end, which was not the resolution, which was not the specific, comfortable conclusion that honoring the code would have required. It was the beginning. It was the garden. It was the first morning in which he had not burned anything, and in which the not burning was not a failure of the code, but the specific cost of something more important than the code, which was the truth, which she had asked for, and which he had given, and which was now in the space between them doing what truths did when they were finally said. He breathed. He was in London. He was in the garden. He was not burning anything. The roses were beginning. Tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you? Was it the altar and the handshake, the diary pages and the burning, the terrace and the shiver, the farewell dinner and the pocket watch, or the garden in March? Drop it below. I want to know what you're carrying from this one, and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next story opens with a woman who walks into a bookshop on a rainy afternoon and finds, on the shelf, a novel with her name in the dedication, written by a man she has never met, who has been in love with a version of her for 20 years. I'll see you there.